Story 1. Burnout. Harold had never been what most would call a responsible or reliable man. He meant well, he just made bad decisions. Between whiskey and poor choices in women, he had burned the first 30 years of his life away, but it all probably seemed like a good idea at the time. After his 30th birthday came and went with the realization that he was going nowhere, Harold decided to take a fourth or fifth stab at getting his life together and applied for an open position as a security guard. Security was something he had been doing off and on, interspersed with a smattering of menial temp jobs, ever since he failed to graduate from the local technical college. Harold was always a large man, with a torso the general size and shape of an oil drum. He also took orders well, had a high school diploma, was not visibly on drugs, and the company had uniforms that fit him in the back room. Security Guard services, therefore, immediately recognized him as exceeding all of their wildest dreams, and hired him on the spot. Details on what exactly Harold would be guarding were scant, which was par for the course in the private security world. His manager shook his hand, wrote down the street address, and told him when to be there to receive his mandatory 8 hours of training. Finding the job site was tricky. The address was downtown, which was always a strange and confusing place for Harold, so he left 20 minutes ahead of how long it should have taken him to get there. Despite that, he was still almost 5 minutes late, because he forgot how difficult it is to find a parking spot downtown. Street spots all required quarters, of which he had none, and parking decks, to a sheltered suburbanite such as himself, seemed to be sprawling labyrinths full of wrong paths and too narrow tunnels where the slightest misstep meant potential death by SUV. In the end, he chose the least cyclopean horror of a parking deck he could find, and started walking toward what he believed to be roughly the direction of the building address. At 9:04 a.m., not quite 5 minutes late for his first day, he found the right place. There was a 7-foot-tall chain-link fence framing the building's perimeter, with a sliding iron gate serving as its only point of entry or egress. The gate stood open, revealing to unremarkable wooden doors set into the center of a ruddy 1-story brick building. The building seemed perhaps as old as he, neither antiquated nor modern, but nestled neatly between the two. The doors led him into a lobby roughly the size of a doctor's waiting area, and adorned similarly. There was a room with a few computers and video monitor jutting awkwardly out from the wall to his left, almost as if the room had been built as an afterthought. There were some tacky red and orange couches in the center of the lobby that looked like they could have been from the disco era, and a receptionist's desk sitting just off to the side of a steel door. Other than for rather impressive brick columns, which rose up to the ceiling at the compass points of the lobby, there was little else, except, of course, for the receptionist. When Harold saw the woman sitting behind the receptionist's desk, he felt that strange lurching feeling in his chest which people usually refer to as their heart skipping a beat. He thought she was perhaps a few years his junior, were it possible to estimate the age of a goddess. Her auburn hair was tied back into a ponytail, which had come forward to drape over the front of a shapely shoulder. He remembered a painting that he had to write an essay on for his art appreciation class back in community college. The painting was of this beautiful woman, demurely censoring herself for the audience, standing in a giant clam shell surrounded by some floaty cherub-looking things. He didn't mind writing the paper because he thought the woman in that painting was absolutely gorgeous. The form and curvature of her body just seemed somehow so perfect, so undeniably right, femininity personified. He had never seen any woman who resembled the one in that painting until today. Botticelli's Aphrodite was real, and she was filling out paperwork at a downtown lobby desk 10 feet in front of him. Harold had moved past silent and progressed toward awkward fumbling for a conversation starter, and she raised her almond brown eyes up to his bewildered blue ones and cheerfully greeted him. "Good morning. You must be Harold. They told me you'd be coming. I'm Rebecca, but you can call me Becky." She smiled brightly and jerked a thumb at the steel door beside her. "The night shift guy's inside doing his rounds. He should be back soon. Take a load off, hum." She gestured at the hideous but seemingly comfortable furniture, and then returned her attention to the papers on her desk. Harold was extremely pleased about the suave grace with which he navigated that conversation. Smiling pleasantly and keeping your damn fool mouth shut, he reasoned, was an ingenious approach to wooing the ladies. He sat and waited for the arrival of the guard who would be training him, and occupied himself by trying not to stare too overtly at the angel in the powder blue Angora sweater. Harold stood upon hearing footsteps in the hallway beyond the steel door. A balding man who appeared to be in his late 50s or early 60s, wearing the same uniform Harold now wore, entered and hastily extended his hand with a pleasant grin. The two shook hands and exchanged introductions. "Name's Matt Gordon, and it's damn good to meet you. Me and James, the afternoon guy, we been split in 12s ever since that last fella quit. You get to be our age. 60-plus hour weeks in this stink hole makes a body count the days until he can draw Social Security. Let's go on now and show you the ropes, since they damn sure ain't gonna pay for a nickel more than 8 hours of training." Harold let his new co-worker lead him into the long hallway through the steel door, giving Becky, the most charming smile he could muster. Before she disappeared from sight, he caught her smiling back, but averting her eyes and biting her lower lip coquettishly while doing so. "Damn," he thought happily, "she's good." The hallway ended at another steel door approximately 50 feet down. "This is what they call the fire corridor," Matt explained. "It's where us and anyone else in the lobby would go if there's a tornado, and what would keep the lobby area safe in case of a fire in the warehouse." Matt shrugged. "Of course, these days, there's hardly any need for it. As you can see." Matt pushed open the door at the end of the hallway, revealing an open-area warehouse that stretched about 50 yards in all directions away from the door. The only sounds were some banal chatter and the faint hum of equipment running. The place was immaculate, and it quickly became apparent why. He looked around to see that there were merely a handful of employees throughout the entire facility. None of them paid Harold or Matt any attention, merely went about their various tasks at hand. Matt gestured around him and chuckled. "Hardly worth 24-hour guards on duty, but they pay us for it. Don't look a Trojan horse in the mouth or whatever, you know." Harold considered correcting him, instead decided it didn't matter, and let the old man ramble. "Basically, they want us to walk every inch of this place twice per shift, and log anything unusual on our reports. We're keeping an eye out for anyone trying to take any of this junk metal they got laying around. Junk metal's worth a few bucks, and the junkers don't mind hopping the fence and sneaking back out without anyone noticing. But folks like that, they're high as kites more often than not, and they'll scatter if they see anyone with a tin badge coming. We're more concerned about scrappers who come to cut copper wire. That shit's worth more than you might imagine. And the ones who come for that are usually sober enough to tell rental cops from the genuine article, and scrappers come armed. So if you see something like that, call the cops. Don't be a hero. The people who own this heap are trying to sell it at everything left within. But that don't mean we get paid extra to bleed for M. Harold nodded assent and let Matt continue in front of him. The world's most cynical tour guide at the most boring tourist attraction in the history of mankind. Harold noticed that the few workers occupying the building are all women sitting at sewing machines, quietly going about their work. None of them appeared to be younger than 60. He interrupted Matt while he was talking about what Harold thought was some stupid diatribe about a guy getting fired for stampeding cattle. He sounded mad, whatever it was. Honestly, Harold had completely tuned out long ago. Thoughts of the receptionist were distracting him, and they were far from unwelcome intruders. So what goes on here, anyway? Matt chuckled, didn't mind being interrupted. He seemed like the kind of guy who enjoyed talking, regardless of the subject. These days, not much of anything goes on, as you can see, but it used to be one of the largest textile manufacturing centers on the East Coast. 200 or so workers, mostly women, would sew all sorts of things: pillowcases, sheets, blankets, curtains. This place got a lot of women into the workforce, which back then wasn't such a popular idea. These were good American jobs. Matt snorted after that last part. Guess you can figure for yourself what happened to that. Harold was afraid that Matt was about to break into some long-winded patriotic chest-thumping speech. He seemed the type, but surprisingly he let the subject drop. They were back at the steel door now, and Matt led him through it once more. Their footfalls echoed down the corridor, and Harold felt his heart race and his breath get short at the thought of seeing Rebecca again. When they came through the door leading to the hallway, she was turned away, filing her nails. At the sound of the door opening, she slowly spun her chair around. Matt had already passed her and continued on toward the room set into the wall. Harold, however, had to stop. He couldn't think of anything to say, so he just smiled and waved. She grinned and flicked her newly manicured hand at him in a playful shoot gesture. Matt turned and sighed theatrically. "Come on, kid. Quit wool gathering, let me show you the brains of this whole operation." Harold complied reluctantly. As it turned out, the brains of the operation was exactly what Harold imagined it would be: a drab, filthy room, the one jutting out from the lobby wall, about the size of a walk-in closet. There were black and white television monitors mounted to the tops of the walls around the room, showing the various cameras throughout the building. The monitors were angled downward for easy viewing, reclining in one hideous orange upholstered chair. There was just enough room for either one small man to sit and one small man to stand, or one large man to sit and one large man to stick his head in from outside of the doorway. The latter, unfortunately for Harold, was their current situation. With the exception of one more building round, he spent the next 7 and a half hours leaning into the control room from its door frame. That is, of course, when he wasn't finding reasons to smile at Rebecca. His feet hurt, the pay was a quarter above minimum wage, the drive was a pain in the ass, his uniform was itchy and too tight around the shoulders, and his co-workers were talkative idiots. This was the worst job he could ever imagine. He would be spending most of his day sitting 10 feet away from the most beautiful woman in the world. This was the best job he could ever imagine. The rest of the week was undeniably the happiest time of Harold's life. Mostly was just him and Rebecca in the lobby, and he would always hurry through his building rounds to get back to her. They talked about their lives, their hopes mostly hers, their regrets mostly his, anything and everything to get to know each other better. By the third day she was joining Harold on his building rounds, so they could keep their conversations going even then. The handful of warehouse workers minded their own business. If they disapproved of the guard and the receptionist patrolling together, no one complained. Harold was aware that it was unprofessional, but could not in his wildest dreams imagine a world in which he cared less about anything than that. On their fourth day together, when they had made it approximately halfway through Harold's first building round, Rebecca stopped and gently reached up to squeeze his left arm. It was the first intimate physical contact between them, and it set an unexpected tingle shooting up from where her hand gripped him. He felt his heart race and his breath catch. He turned toward her with what he prayed was a casual smile, trying to pretend he was a young Burt Reynolds, and all of this pleasant arm groping was just a regular Thursday for him. When Harold saw her face, he had to struggle even harder to maintain his composure. No woman had ever looked at him the way she was at this moment. It was a curious mixture of worrying and longing. And for him, perhaps, but he tried not to get his hopes up. Rebecca leaned in and tilted her head towards his, not quite whispering, but taking on a low, conspiratorial tone. "Harold, would you like to go out with me?" Grinning like an idiot, he whispered, "Are you really asking me on a date?" She laughed melodiously, warming Harold to his very core. Her hand left his arm and punched him playfully on the chest. "You know darn well what I mean. Harold, we go out. Can we get out of here together sometime?" Harold loved his father and tried his best to make him proud. His father was a man of many sayings, most of them clever guidelines by which to live along what he called the straight and narrow. Harold was never very good at following the straight and narrow, but there was one saying which had always stuck: "Don't shit where you eat." "Sorry, Dad," he thought, "but I am pretty sure this is fate." Harold reached out and took Rebecca's hands in his, nodding eagerly. "I would like that more than anything in the world," he said, "so maybe we can go out later today." She stepped closer, and he caught an intoxicating whiff of her perfume. He was hardly an expert on the subject, but it smelled like jasmine and vanilla. "Absolutely. Getting out of this place with you sounds lovely." She squealed eagerly at his reply and hopped up and down, her sensible heels clacking on the warehouse floor when she returned to ground. "Harold, you, sir, are the cat's pajamas. I have to go tell all my girlfriends. They told me you would say yes." Rebecca reached up, gave him another playful punch to the chest, and issued that same laugh once again. Something of the melody in her laughter made his heart flutter. She darted off toward the lobby area, giggling and whispering to the old seamstresses as she passed. Harold was left flushed and bewildered, but far from complaining. He suddenly became self-aware and jerked his head around to see if anyone had been watching their little exchange. But there was no one. Breathing a sigh of relief and tingling all over, he hurriedly set about finishing his round. He very much wanted to be back in that lobby, making small talk and making plans. Rounding the corner of the building which marked his near return to the entrance, something flashed at the periphery of his vision, a yellowish-orange burst of light. Harold spun toward it and saw one of the sewing machine operators about 20 feet from him. She was a heavy-set lady of perhaps 80 years, wearing a white pantsuit. An outlet between her feet had been overloaded and was sparking wildly in all directions. Around her ankles, the sparks were causing the hem of her pants began to sizzle and curl inward and upward with steadily accelerating rapidity. Harold breathed an obscenity as he watched the woman bend forward as far as she could and start flailing stupidly at her thighs, nowhere near low enough to beat at the flames, though he saw with mounting horror that this wouldn't be the case for very long. He ran toward her and slid down to try to stop the fire from spreading any further upward, but could tell almost immediately that this had progressed to the point where he would need an extinguisher. Worst of all was that the old lady seemed to be going into shock, either that or she had some kind of dementia. She had ceased even the most feeble efforts to help him put out the fire, instead just stood there staring down at him. Harold scrambled to his feet and grabbed the nearest fire extinguisher. He pulled the pin, aimed, and squeezed the handle. A puff of carbon dioxide roughly the size of Harold's head emerged and promptly fizzled out after having traveled no more than a foot toward the elderly woman, whose waistband was now being licked by orange and red flames. It was then he noticed they had gathered no onlookers. At first he assumed everyone was just paralyzed by the rapidly devolving situation, but after the fire extinguisher failed, he desperately looked around and realized that everyone was merely going about their day. A surreal sense of his impotence in the face of doom sank in on him like a storm cloud as he watched their apathetic meanderings about the warehouse. "Hey, someone help us, Christ's sake. She's burning alive," Harold yelled at the top of his lungs and far more shrilly than he intended, now running full tilt to the next nearest extinguisher. The ladies nearby continued to sew, some making casual conversation with each other. He only then realized that something had begun to go horribly wrong, and that this was a trend likely to continue for the foreseeable future. This time he checked the pressure gauge before running back to the burning woman. The needle informed him that the extinguisher was, of course, completely empty. The noise he made at this discovery was a species of scream-grunt hybrid, and the dull clang of the extinguisher as he dropped it to the ground. Harold spun back toward the woman he was increasingly sure would escape this incident with no less than third-degree burns, and stood there slack-jawed and frozen. What had transpired in the 10 seconds it took him to locate and inspect the second fire extinguisher? The woman was nowhere to be seen. Not that she had vanished, just that locating her now seemed moot. She was doubtless trapped somewhere within the conflagration which had spread with such horrendous rapidity that it now enveloped the entire southern end of the warehouse. Harold felt his eyebrows and the tips of every exposed hair on his body begin to blacken and curl. His eyes, wide with disbelief, stung from the sudden and unexpected heat as he watched the dreadful scene unfold. The fire was voracious in its hunger, mercilessly efficient in its task, and swept through the warehouse with a sort of chaotic precision. Its tendrils would whip and whirl in response to no discernible stimuli, only to unerringly land upon and subsequently consume its next target. Those workers who had not already become its kindling continued about their day, oblivious. Harold, having done what he felt was his duty, and then some, turned and ran for the fire corridor. Harold flung the door open, the flames now closing in near enough for the steel handle to burn his hands as he bolted through the threshold and down the hall. He barreled through the second steel door, slammed it shut behind him, and sucked in deep draughts of fresh air. His lungs felt like they had been cooked to at least medium rare. He had done his best. Now it was time to get Rebecca to call the fire department, and for them to get the hell out of that inferno before the flames could consume them. Hands on his knees and still gasping, he turned toward the receptionist's desk. No Rebecca. Harold panicked for a moment, then realized that she had probably either seen the fire or heard him screaming about the fire and done what any sensible person would have done: call the authorities and then run outside. He turned and ran toward the doors, grabbing hold of both handles and flinging them open simultaneously. Harold screamed and screamed, and when he screamed, he backed away, and when he backed away, she stepped forward. By whatever infernal mechanism this nightmare made manifest was powered, she stepped forward, and when she stepped forward, he fell backward against the door frame. She raised her visceral visage over and past Harold toward the fire corridor, and she spoke. This affront to sanity summoned Rebecca's voice and gleefully issued a guttural imperative out. From behind he heard the steel lobby door flung open against its frame, and the gibbering cacophony of a dozen shambling horrors. He could smell the sickly sour stench of charred, rotting flesh inexorably approaching from that direction. He did not turn to witness their approach or attempt to rise to his feet. He merely stared straight ahead, gawking hopelessly at the putrid, charnel creature he could not allow himself to accept as his beloved Rebecca. She descended upon him, placing her cadaverous hands upon his chest and arm. She whispered her thanks, and pressed what the grave had preserved of her lips against his. His mouth was sealed by hers, so with his last breath he inhaled deeply through his nose. He died with a smile on his lips, for her scent was jasmine and vanilla. Story 2. Breach. There are no more happy endings. The forest across the canal loomed towards him. The worst ice storm Detroit had seen in a century had done its work well, transforming the entirety of the park into frozen sculptures. The trees seemed to grasp at the air as they swayed in the howling wind. Many of their branches had already broken under the weight, falling heavily on to the icy stream below. He eyed the forest, standing on the other side of the worn stone bridge, hands buried in his pockets. He'd seen the bridge before in pictures, and its utter mundanness came as something of a surprise. The stones embedded in the concrete were ancient, stripped of the snow that had recently covered them by the wind. Whatever handrails had once guarded the edges of the bridge were gone, long since rusted away, except for the thick, slushy trail of blood that ran up the center of it. There was absolutely no indication of what he knew was waiting for him on the other side. He had an idea who the blood on the bridge belonged to. Lucille Gale had been the last of 7 young adults who to have disappeared in a month. The first 6 had been found already, their bodies discovered in various locations along the bank of the Detroit River. The first of them had his skin completely removed, expertly flayed off. The second was so badly ripped apart that it had taken a week to identify her. The third was found lying in an alleyway with lungs full of water and seaweed a full 100 meters away from the river. It wasn't until the fourth teenager was found with her skeleton missing that his organization took interest. They'd swooped down onto the case overnight, so desperate to get him onto the scene that they'd sent him there via translocation. From the moment he emerged from the Detroit alleyway, shaking off the horror of what he always saw when he translocated, it had been nothing but investigation with the local police and terrified locals. The FBI got involved when two more children turned up dead, exsanguinated, and strangled with their own intestines. Respectively, federal agents were always the most difficult to deal with. They were suspicious of his badge. Despite it being completely authentic, they were suspicious of how massive he was, towering over most of them, easily broader than any. They were suspicious of how much he already knew about the case, despite having arrived only a few days before they. What made them more suspicious than anything was how quickly their bosses told them to shut up and get out of his way. The men who ran the bureau from their offices in D.C. had no idea who he was, and none of them were interested in finding out. They had all heard the legends from those that had led the bureau before them. They knew what happened when men like him showed up on the scene of a crime too terrible for words. The problem stopped, and it was better to not ask questions how. Any federal involvement was quickly terminated, and the assigned agents reassigned somewhere else. They'd remember this case for the rest of their lives. They might one day have colleagues who had similar encounters with men like him and endlessly discuss what organization he might have represented. Theories range from an obscure Homeland Security cell to the CIA Special Operations Group. They would jokingly refer to men like him as the others, those we don't speak of the activity, or even as the men in black if they were feeling sarcastic. His organization knew all of this. There wasn't much they didn't. The man took a reading. The palm-sized device lit up, whirring as he placed it on the ground. He stepped back, fishing out a pack of cigarettes and a lighter from his pocket. The twin marbles of glass atop the reader spun faster and faster, the silver liquid inside them catching the bright blue light shining from the dozen or so diodes that covered the front and back of the device. After a few frantic seconds, the marbles were spinning so fast above the device the man could no longer see them. A moment later, the reader gave a frantic shriek. The globes exploded in a puff of powdered glass, the liquid flying through the air but evaporating before it touched the ground. He sighed and lit his cigarette. Initial readings suggest an unusually high breach in the Javelin-Night barrier, he said. The presence of the remains of Lucille Gale confirms initial assumptions that she did not survive the hosting. Extreme weather patterns indicate the presence of a midnight-level event occurring within the confines of the breach. He put his smoke to his lips again. The cherry flared brightly, a tiny speck of light burning defiantly in the darkness. The FBI and the police might not have a clue what the missing teens had in common, but he had known it the moment he had visited the morgue and seen their tortured bodies. Each of them was psychic, very, very psychic, and Lucille Gale most of all. He doubted that any of them were fully aware of it. Perhaps they had experienced vivid dreams that later came true, or had wondered whether or not they were at fault for the power outages that followed their every outburst. If left to themselves, they would have grown exponentially more powerful, most likely to the point where they would have been targeted and killed by his organization. There were very few like them that managed to make it into adulthood, and none of them managed to die of old age. Even at their nascent stage, however, they possessed more than enough raw ability to be of use to something on the other side. Something was trying desperately to come through, something that had no place even in a nightmare. The other 16s had proven unsuitable as doorways, but judging from the cataclysmic storm that had engulfed half the county, the man guessed that Lucille Gale would prove more than adequate in hail. He felt the smoke burn a trail down his lungs as he considered his next words. "I still plan on crossing," he said. "Regardless of what's fueling the breach, I'll ensure sufficient distraction or damage to allow Aegis translocation into the target area. Upon loss of communication, I stand by my original recommendation of an immediate kinetic on my last known position." He paused. "Not that you ever listen to what I have to say." His answer was the howling wind and a voice that spoke directly into his mind. He would have smiled at the response if smiling were something he was capable of. Instead, he drew Javelin's gun from its holster on his side, the massive revolver fitting snugly into his equally massive hands. He squeezed the rubberized grip, fingers caressing the raised knotwork that adorned the barrel. The man took one last drag on his cigarette, flicking it away as he strode purposely onto the bridge, careful to keep his steps within the trail of Lucille Gale's remains. Normally crossing over required a tremendous amount of concentration and no small amount of luck. His repelling tattoos would burn so bad they'd singe his skin, and the tiny nodes lining the center of his brain would overload with static. Wearing an Aegis made it a bit easier, but even the best protection his organization could offer didn't keep out the visions. He'd been there when Javelin had died, and it was that memory that was returned to violent life every time he translocated. This time there were no visions, no screaming ghost from decades past. He simply stepped out of here and into nowhere, the symbols that were carved onto his flesh flaring briefly beneath his heavy clothing. The ease of the translocation confirmed his worst fears. It took a lot of power to rend such a huge hole in reality. Whatever caused this had been very old and very, very angry. For the first time, he wondered bemusedly if he'd been right to turn down assignment to an Aegis unit. Regardless, he was relieved to see that the trail of human remains provided him a clear path through what was otherwise a land of absolute madness. Whatever thing had nested and birthed itself in the mind of Lucille Gale had not been kind to her. The thick, black-red smear on the ground led deep into the forest, which now towered thousands of feet up into the air. He thought he caught a glimpse of something massive above him, moving in the storm clouds, its barbed coils swaying lazily from the sky. The frost-covered branches of the trees were all screaming with a woman's voice, weeping and sobbing, crying for a mother and a father and the safety of home. He assumed the voice was Lucille's. He started off down the trail, booted feet splashing noisily in gristle that seemed to grow deeper as he walked. Around him the world shifted and rearranged itself at random. The trees exploded, sending ice shards the size of buildings crashing down around him. Something massive fell out of the sky, its leathered wings curling around its dead form, crashing to the earth behind a distant mountain range that abruptly forced itself out of the frozen earth. The wind intensified and on it he could hear a name being whispered over and over again. He didn't recognize the name. He wondered if it was his. The further he went along the trail, the more twisted reality became. He wondered how deep into the forest he was actually going in the real world. On more than occasion, he had traveled for days inside a breach, only to find himself a step or two away from where he had started upon crossing out. Time and distance could have very little meaning in the veiled world. Mercifully, the laws of physics usually held sway, but those laws were easily bent or broken depending on what was causing such an awesome disturbance. There was a place, he knew, where physics simply didn't exist. Even as he walked, he could see it, far on the horizon, a thin line of shadow that seemed to swallow up even the darkness. Calling it oblivion wasn't accurate. There were things in the nothing, things that made the horrors he dealt with on a regular occasion seem downright pleasant. He'd been to the edge before, watching reality and unreality disappear into the howling claws of whatever waited for men and demons on the other side of existence. Men smarter than he surmised that whatever it was had no power to enter or affect the world he sought to protect. He supposed this was true. It was hungry and would have long since devoured the third dimension had it been capable. The ground beneath his feet shook, and he suddenly found himself standing in a clearing. The storm-racked sky was gone, replaced with a peaceful canvas devoid of any light save that of a full moon. The wind stopped abruptly. Snowflakes fell slowly through the air like the inside of a tumbling snow globe. A vast clearing spread out before him, the smeared remains of an overly ambitious psychic, a vivid splash of red on the virgin snow. There was a child in the clearing at the end of the trail. The boy was sobbing, his knees drawn up to his chest. The man approached him slowly. He tentatively took a step off the pathway and into the snow. His feet sunk into reassuring solid ground. The man began circling the boy, trudging through snow that came up to his shins. "Go away," the boy sniffled, burying his face in his arms. "Go away. I just want to be left alone." The man didn't say anything. It was better to not talk to them if you could avoid. They played the game for eons. Any word you spoke could be used against you. Instead, he kept circling, trying to see the child's face. He didn't understand why this was important, but that was irrelevant. Gut instinct had kept him alive up to that point, and he trusted it to take him further. "Why did you follow me?" The boy screamed, kicking his feet into the ground. "I want to be left alone. Leave me alone." The world around them trembled slightly, and the man cursed under his breath. "You aren't alone," he answered. He had to buy himself more time. It needed to be tricked into revealing its true self, or it might simply push him back out into reality out of annoyance. "You're with Lucille." Lucille Gale, remember, face still buried in his arms. The boy laughed. "Lucille, I remember Lucille." The other ones all ran, but Lucille wasn't afraid. She stayed. She told me that she wasn't afraid, that she wanted to help me. She held me so close. His voice changed in an instant, becoming a tone no human vocal cord could ever hope to produce. "She's rotting inside me. I cannot be bound. I cannot be harmed. I am eternal." "You might be eternal, but your son wasn't, was he?" The warding tattoos on his skin started to prickle. That was a good sign. It was getting angry. "That's who you're pretending to be right now. Your son, you don't know what you're talking about." The boy sniffed, his voice that of a child's again. I'm just a little boy. I'm just a little boy all alone out here in the woods. No, you're not. Your name is Claude Lache. You killed your wife and son here before it was a park, before there were many people here at all. You started running, and when you couldn't go anymore, you killed a family that tried to help you. You ate them. Do you remember? You ate them, but even that couldn't keep you from starving. You nearly died from hunger in the wilderness 100 miles north of here. The man cocked his head to the side and decided to push the issue. You pissed yourself when the wolves came. You screamed for your mother when they started eating you, like you screamed for her every day in hell. The child exploded in a shower of blood. His face landed on the snow next to the man, steam pouring from its eye sockets and laughing mouth. Where the child once stood was what his organization would call a Class 1X paranormal entity, unveiled in all its horrific glory. Its 3 heads sprouted from between its shoulders, each of them gnashing on a tongue that flickered like a snake. A pair of arms sprouted from between its legs. Their fingers ended in leech-like mouths. The skin on its bloated stomach was stretched so far it was nearly transparent. Inside it he could see the tortured face of Lucille Gale, her hands pushing desperately to get out. The thing that was once Claude Lache, the first serial killer to walk American soil, thundered with laughter. Its voice echoed around the clearing where it had committed its first crimes nearly 350 years prior. I cannot be bound. I cannot be harmed. I am eternal. I am God. The first round fired through Javelin's gun put an end to such boastful nonsense. Lache roared as the round tore a fist-sized hole through the center of one of its heads. It clapped a massive hand to its face, reeling in agony. The man fired again and again, moving towards it at a flat-out run. While the danger of being forced out of the breach was over, he now faced the equally real threat of death at the target's hands. Javelin's revolver was a powerful weapon against the denizens of the Vale, and the fact that it had already proved ineffective told him everything he needed to know. He'd never survive a direct fight. Lache had dragged itself out of the pit, and the mindless hate that allowed such perseverance had twisted it something wholly inhuman. Every heaving breath it took was the scream of a dying man. Every guttural curse was the wheeze of lungs filling with bloody clots. It was a lord of death now, a corpse god, the grave incarnate. The only way to finish this was to destabilize the breach enough to allow armored translocation. The only way to destabilize the breach was to kill the soul that was fueling it. Each of the bullets he fired found their mark. By the time he had reached the target, the man had already reloaded. He fired at point-blank range, aiming at Lache's bloated stomach. A massive, scaled hand moved to intercept the rounds. The same hand struck him hard, tossing him through the air. He fired as he flipped head over heels, managing to keep the target at bay as he rolled on the ground. It was on him by the time he righted himself, choking as its tongues whipped towards his torso and legs. He thought about evading, considered his options, and calmly decided against it. The barbs bit into his flesh and tensed, digging into his skin. He grunted, pain dampeners flooding his system. The venom hit him a second later. He vomited, body shuddering in the throes of a seizure as the poison reached his brain. The receptors in his skull were shrieking, fighting off both the toxins and the terrifying psychic power Lache was unleashing through his unwilling host. He caught brief glimpses of the monster's past, the last confused looks on the faces of the Chippewa family he had butchered. The taste of human flesh in his mouth, the awful, maddening climb out of the bottom of torment back into the world of the living. The man felt the barbs tense, followed by a violent jerking on his left leg. He looked down in time to see it come clean off, ripped away at the knee, disappearing down Lackey's gullet. He saw his leg floating inside Lackey's bloated stomach as he fired into it again and again. Distracted, the target had no chance to defend itself. Its immense stomach cocked like a blister, spewing digestive juices over the frozen earth. It dropped him as it stumbled backwards, yelping. Its hands clapped over its stomach. Between its massive fingers, the half-digested form of Lucille Gale spilled out. She writhed in the snow, screaming through a mouth that had fused shut. Lachey reached for her desperately, but it was already too late. The man fired a single shot. The high-caliber shell blew her head clean off. The clearing was completely still for a moment. Then there was an earth-shattering roar that sounded all too familiar to him. The breach shuddered and tilted. The whole world sloped at a downward angle, making Lachey stumble and fall. Both monster and man went tumbling head over heels towards the edge of the forest. The man's fevered mind screamed at him to make sure he landed on the bridge. At the last second he reached out, his hand slapping down into the trail of blood, arresting his fall as he held tight to his only line back to reality. There was another roar, and nothingness came howling up towards them. The world below him almost completely vanished. The trees and the mountain ranges swallowed up by a mouth made up of nightmares. The power of Lucille Gale, wielded ruthlessly by Lachey, had been the only thing that had kept the breach open. With her death, the thin barrier between the veiled world and what lay beyond came crashing down. He saw Lachey land in the trees below. The monster leapt back into the clearing, scrabbling to find purchase in the snow. The man calmly fired his remaining rounds into the target, watching as each bullet hit home. With one last howl, the monster lost its grip and fell down into darkness. The man didn't have any time to feel satisfied. The breach was collapsing, shaking apart at the seams. Like a rising tide, the void came up to greet him, laughing and screaming. He could make up indistinct shapes as it came on, shapes that reminded him of Javelin, the smell of her hair and the sound of her voice when she told him, "I'll love you until the day I die," and the look on her face when she fell, when she let go, when she let go. Let go, let go, let go and fall. Agent Hauser. The man looked up into glowing blue eyes. The Aegis was only a few feet above him, standing with its steel feet planted firmly in the bridge. The dying light of the breach cast strange shadows over its black armor and menacing weapon arrays. It reached out to him, its fingers strangely slender for such a massive construct. "We haven't much time, sir," it said. "Please take my hand to initiate translocation." Hauser didn't hesitate. He holstered his pistol in a single fluid motion and reached for its hand. Half a dozen ports on the Aegis back popped open with a pneumatic hiss. The construct's translocation generator came online, emitting brilliant white light as it drank in the otherworldly energy of the breach. "Translocation imminent," it intoned. "Brace for impact." Hauser looked down. Nothingness looked back at him, smiling, reaching. "Brace for impact, brace for impact." Brace, he hit the snowy ground so hard it drove the air out of his lungs. He gasped, rolling onto his side. The wind that had been howling moments before seemed to calm by the moment. Soon it had disappeared entirely. The snow it had been driving left to tumble lazily to the earth. The entire world seemed to have become still and silent. His eyes were drawn to the cigarette he had flicked away before entering the breach. It was inches away from him, still burning. He'd been gone only seconds in the real world. He reached for it with a trembling hand, the cherry flaring brightly as he inhaled. It was almost too damp to smoke, but he'd never tasted anything better. The Aegis was already working on his leg. Hauser felt a brief twinge of pain as it spread antiseptic paste over his wound, spraying it from a small retractable hose attached to its hip. The paste quickly turned to a murky red gel as it stopped the bleeding. In a few seconds, Hauser's entire leg went numb, and he could feel the pain-dampening drugs in his system start to recede. It turned to look at him, the center eye of its forehead turning a bright green as it scanned his vital signs. "I apologize," it said. "I arrived as soon as translocation became possible. I had hoped to get there in time to assist you with the entity and prevent such damage from occurring." Hauser managed a weak laugh. Killing the psychic was the only way to make translocation possible. And this, he waved his hand at his stump, this was the only way to get close enough for a clean shot. I'm still glad you came. If it had finished me off, someone would have needed to finish the job. Hauser paused, squinting up at the construct's expressionless face. "Who is that in there?" The Aegis gave a metallic laugh as its visor slid back. A female face stared back at him, pale and young and covered in scars. "You might not remember me, Agent Hauser," she said, her voice soft and lilting. "I was in training for the Aegis program when you were sent on your last assignment. I remember you. I was there when you were initiated and picked your name, Bologna, Agent Bologna." He took another drag on his cigarette, staring up at the stars. "She'd had fewer scars than damn pretentious name, if you ask me." He heard the sound of her visor slide shut as a response. "Recovery units are en route," she said in the sexless voice of a machine. "They will be here within the minute. Since he is certain your receivers have almost certainly shut down as a result of your psychic trauma, Agent Dolos has asked me to extend congratulations to you on his behalf." Bologna cocked her head to the side, and Hauser could sense her smile even behind the impassive face mask. "He also says he would never have authorized the kinetic strike even if we'd lost track of you within the breach. He said he will always give you a chance to find your way out." Now it was Hauser's turn to laugh. He wouldn't say that if he had seen what was in there. "One of these days, something is going to come through, and we'll have to blow the breach to Kingdom Come. One of these days, I'll be right." He leaned his head back into the freezing snow, letting it cool his head. The static from the destroy receptors inside his skull was giving him a pounding headache. Taking one last inhale, he tossed the smoke away from him for good. It landed solidly on the grisly path Hauser had taken into nothingness. Drowned in blood, surrounded by darkness, the light of the cigarette quickly faded and died. Story 3. The Leshy Well. "Could be worse," I muttered, pulling up the driveway to my new home away from home. While I knew such a cheap off-campus living arrangement wouldn't be nearly as nice as living in a dorm at the university, the pictures made my new domicile seem so much nicer. What I was met with instead was a rundown, rusty-looking cabin. The lawn was overgrown, covered in dead leaves and browning weeds. A squat old tree with gnarled branches dominated most of the front yard, casting gloomy shadows over the wooden cabin. The house was painted a forest green at some point. Now the paint was chipped, leaving unsightly patches of bare wood showing through. However, not many college freshmen could boast moving into their own house, so I could not complain. All those summers working instead of hanging out with high school friends had finally paid off. Setting the car in park, I hopped out to unpack my meager possessions. Luckily, I hadn't needed to pack furniture. The landlord promised my new home would be adequately furnished. The air outside the house had a nice piney smell to it. Birds chirped, flitting between the branches of the forest that skirted the sides and backyard of the cabin. It was one of the warmer days of fall, very warm for a late September day in Maryland, though not quite so warm as my hometown of Miami. It took me only a few minutes to unload the car and explore my meager new home. As promised, the house did come furnished, with stained couches, a squeaky bed, an old TV, and kitchen appliances that seemed like they belonged in an antique store. Laying my boxes on the kitchen counter, I decided to explore the backyard. The sun shone sparsely here, where tall forest trees blocked its warmth. The actual woods started a good few yards away from my house, giving me a small yard to use for whatever. Hey, I heard someone call. It sounded like it came from the woods. Hello, I called. Over here, said the voice. Looking, I located the caller. A young man stood leaning against one of the trees nearest my yard. Hi. Wow, hi. I definitely didn't see you there, I said, walking over to my visitor. Sorry about that. No problem, the guy said, a big charming smile on his face. So you're my new neighbor then? Neighbor? I asked. I thought I was the only one out here in this part of town. The guy shook his head. There's a few houses out here scattered around. Not many, though. I live that way. The boy pointed through the woods behind him. Nice. Well, I'm Alex. I'm studying over at the university. You go there too? I asked. The boy certainly looked like he could be college age, maybe a bit younger. He had a weird youthful look, all soft, almost androgynous features, pale skin, short brown hair, lean build. No, I'm taking this semester off to help my uncle run his farm. They've hit a rough patch, and I could use the money. Name's Eli, by the way, the boy said, offering his hand. I shook it. So I'm guessing you're new to these parts, right? Eli asked. I nodded. I'm from Florida, Miami, the Sunshine State. Most people do it the other way around, you know. Move from here to Florida. Not that Maryland's all bad, he said, flashing another one of his smiles. Although around this part of town we get some pretty weird shit. I cocked an eyebrow in confusion. Weird? You mean like break-ins and stuff? Eli shook his head. No, weirder than that. Creepy, unexplainable stuff, I smiled. You mean ghosts and all that crap. Sorry, dude, but I'm not a believer. Not exactly ghosts. Let's just say I wouldn't advise you to go walking around the woods at night. People hear weird noises, like screaming and stuff. Pretty freaky, if you ask me, he said, shaking his head. Not, he added, that I'm trying to scare you away. The people here are plenty nice, and the woods are beautiful. Hey? I tell you what, why don't we go on a hike someday? I'll show you some of my favorite haunts and tell you about some of the history of this place. Sound like a plan? Yeah, I said, sounds good. Hey, it was really nice meeting you, Eli. but I have to go get unpacked. I only have, like, 3 days before classes start, but I'm sure I'll see you around, right? Yeah, man, he said, flashing a smile. We said our goodbyes, and I left Eli there to go unpack my boxes. I was mostly done by late afternoon, so after a quick 30-minute trip to the nearest grocery store, I was pretty set up in my new home. As I lay in bed that night, exhausted from the day's travels and general business, I had pretty much forgotten the specifics of my conversation with Eli. Well, right up until I heard the sound of a woman screaming bloody murder outside of my house, I shot up in bed swearing under my breath. What the hell, I thought. Getting out of bed, I padded barefoot across the bedroom floor to my window. I jumped at another shriek from outside. I could see nothing through the darkness outside my window. Swearing again, I grabbed my phone from my nightstand. My heart was thumping audibly in my chest, and a cold sweat had broken out on my back. Turning on the flashlight on my phone, I raced back to the window. The beam of the flashlight pierced through the dark and landed right on a fox. The creature let out another scream howl of alarm and shot into the woods. Letting out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, I ran a hand through my hair. A frickin' fox, I muttered to myself. Who knew they scream like that? Surprisingly, it didn't take me long to fall back asleep that night. The next few weeks went by in a blur. I went to school, met some really nice guys and girls, got oriented to the campus. I had my first classes, saw Eli once or twice more, and continued hearing that damn fox in the woods. One afternoon in the beginning of October, I asked Eli about it. Hey, remember when I moved here and you tried to scare me with that story about noses in the woods? Well, there's this fox that likes to scream outside my window sometimes. Makes a hell of a noise, like someone getting murdered. So much for your ghosts, huh? I laughed. I wasn't talking about a fox that day, Eli said, his face completely serious. I know what a fox sounds like. Come on, Eli. I'm not that gullible. I'm not kidding, Eli pressed. There's this, story about the woods. I mean, it's sort of cliché, but I think this one is more than a story. Well, back on this town was first settled, a lot of the settlers were religious Protestant refugees from Eastern European countries. You know, all that stuff you learn about in your high school history class. Well, these people were super superstitious. When they settled here, people started disappearing. They blamed it on a forest spirit called the Leshy, a spirit that could take the form of anyone he wanted and lured travelers astray. The Leshy would make strange noises to lead people into the woods, where they would take them away to their caves and torture them to death. Sounds fun, I joked, not even slightly. I think I've heard the Leshy. They make these, strange noises. It's hard to explain. Definitely not a fox. I think the best way to describe it is kind of like a cross between a goat and a bear. Well, something like that. And you're saying you've heard this before? I asked skeptically. Yeah, I have, and that's not even the weirdest part. See, the police in this town have pretty much given up on missing person cases. People go into the woods at night, and then poof, they're gone just like that. That's definitely weird, I said. You don't believe me, do you? He asked. I shook my head. Sorry, bud, not really. I told you I don't believe in ghost stories. Fine. But when you get eaten by a giant forest monster, don't say I didn't warn you. All right. Hey, completely off topic. Do you want to come to a party next weekend? I'm just inviting a few kids from school for some drinks. I thought you might want to meet the gang." Eli considered for a moment. "Yeah, that sounds fun." "What day did you say?" "Next Friday. Doesn't really matter what time you show up, as long as it's after 8, I said. "Yeah, I'll see if I can make it. Sounds fun," Eli said. He left soon after that, back into whatever woodland path he takes home. I skipped classes the day of the party to set up and get ready. One of my older friends was bringing the liquor and some snacks. I tried to tidy my house as best as possible, shoving piles of dirty clothes into my bedroom and scrubbing impossible stains out of the old couches. Before long, the first guest arrived. I let them choose the music, which blared out from some speakers I'd won last year at after prom. Eli was one of the last to arrive. To my relief, he seemed to get along with my school friends just fine, which was more than I could have hoped for. Eli had a lot more of a chill air about him, whereas some of the college kids were wild. The party went about as well as could be expected. I got shit-faced pretty early on. I'd always been a bit of a lightweight, so I probably should have known to take it easy on the drinks. Around midnight, I started to notice that one of my friends, James, who had a bit of a reputation as a wandering drunk, had gone missing. I didn't think much of it at first, but the longer I didn't see him, the more I worried, which wasn't helped by my drunken state. I began asking around for him, but either nobody knew or everyone was too far gone to care. I was about to call him before I heard what sounded like James' voice from outside the cabin. Stumbling out the back door, I called his name. "Jay, you out here?" For a while, all I could hear was the sound of crickets, frogs, the normal noises of woodland nightlife. But then I heard it, the scream. It was unlike anything I had ever heard before, different from a fox's scream. That was for sure. "Alex," a call shook me from my stupor. "Alex, over here, James." I cried, recognizing my friend's voice. "Alex," James called again. Another one of those horrible screams came after. "I'm coming, Jay," I shouted, running into the tree line. The shrieks of whatever animal could possibly make that noise sounded closer as I ran past trees and shrubs, ripping my jeans free from thorns and jumping over roots. It took all my concentration to keep running. "James," I called. "Where are you?" "Alex," he shouted. He sounded close. So did the animal screams. "James," I tried again. "Jay, where are you?" No response. The woods became deathly still. Not even the bugs or the frogs made a noise. "James, Alex, Eli, is that you?" I said. "What was he doing out here?" "Yeah. What the hell are you doing out here?" he asked. "James, well, I heard him, and there were these screams, and I stumbled." "James," Eli said. "James was passed out in your front yard. I saw you looking for him earlier. I saw him under that tree in your lawn, and then I heard you screaming. Here, why don't we go inside? It's not safe to be out here alone at night." I nodded, still in shock. What the hell just happened? Eli grabbed my arm and walked me back into the house. All the while I couldn't think to say a damn thing, probably thanks to the alcohol. That night I drank myself to sleep, unwilling to believe what I had heard in the woods and unwilling to talk to anyone about it. I woke up the next day on the couch with a massive headache. The events of the last night were fuzzy, except for the bit about my run in the woods. I decided I needed to find Eli. I was ready to believe his stories now. Grabbing an aspirin, I texted the boy to meet me at my house within an hour. He texted back almost instantaneously. While I waited for Eli, I decided to look up the Leshy on my phone. Clicking on the Wikipedia page gave me nothing I didn't already learn from Eli. Leshy is a trickster spirit. Leshy has a strange scream. Leshy can mimic voices. By the time Eli arrived, I hadn't gotten anywhere with my research. My fears about the previous night did not abate. Eli, tell me I'm not going crazy, I said as my friend walked through the front door. Why? He innocently asked. I heard it out there last night. The Leshy, the one from your story, I explained. You were drunk, Eli reasoned. I shook my head. I know what I heard. That wasn't just some alcoholic hallucination. It was out there with me. You said you weren't a believer, Eli said skeptically. I am now. He sighed. All right, I'll tell you what I know. Ever since I moved here when I was a little beau, I've heard the noises in the woods. My parents used to joke about there being monsters. They never knew how right they were. Remember how I told you that the Leshy takes people? Well, when I was in the 2nd grade, there was this girl in my class. Strange kid. She didn't talk to anyone, just hung out in the woods every day. Well, one day she went out there and didn't come back. There was this huge police search, Amber Alert and all that. They thought it was some pedophile kidnapper. Well, they never found the body. Okay, kids go missing all the time, I said. That's not the weird part, Eli continued. Every night after they announced that the girl was missing, I would wait outside on my back porch, staring into the woods. I was just a kid. I wanted to help by keeping a lookout for her. Well, every night after the kidnapping, I could hear singing in the woods. A little girl singing. It was her voice. I think the Leshy wanted me to go into the woods, too. Eli trailed off. I thought about his story. If that was true, then that means that the Leshy could have been hunting me that night, and Eli came to my rescue just in time. So you think this Leshy is trying to get to me? I asked. I think it doesn't care who it gets to, as long as it gets someone, Eli replied. I want to find it, I said, my heart fluttering in my chest. What? Eli asked. I said I want to find it, I repeated, shocking myself with my resolution. Even though I knew that I needed to find this creature, I want proof, something we can show someone who can help us. Who's going to help us? Eli asked. The police can't help. They couldn't find that missing girl, and I don't know about you, but I don't want to have to call the ghost busters. Ha, I said sarcastically. I want to do this for myself at the very least. Will you help me? Eli sighed. Yes, fine, I'll help you. But we aren't doing this half-assed. You need to get equipment. Cameras, flashlights, something to defend yourself, the whole shebang. Shebang, I chortled. Hell yeah, shebang. Eli said, Okay. He'll see if James or Kate want to come too, I said. Out of all my college friends, they'd be the ones crazy enough to help. Okay, when are we doing this? Eli asked. I considered for a moment. Tomorrow night. I ran out to the store that night, half terrified and half giddy with excitement. I made sure to pick up the items Eli asked for. If he believed they would help, I trusted his instruction. He seemed to know a hell of a lot more about these things than I did. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard the screaming again. Not the fox, the other. The leshy, soon enough, I challenged the spirit. Soon enough, the next day was spent contacting James and Kate and hanging with them until Eli was ready. I decided not to tell James and Kate the real reason for going into the woods, and let them believe we were going for a hike. It would be better that way. Not that they would have believed my story anyway. We ventured into the woods 2 hours before sunset. For the most part it was a nice day, a little chilly, but sunny even through the copse of trees. For the entirety of the first hour, I could really believe we were just on some friendly hike. The woodland vegetation was sparse enough to offer easy trails to follow, and for the most part the ground was even enough for easy walking. We talked about school and movies. We joked. It seemed like nothing at all was wrong in the woods. Eli, I whispered to the bow, falling behind Kate, and James, I haven't heard anything strange. Am starting to feel a little stupid about this whole thing. It's all right, the Leshy might be waiting until night time. I mean, I haven't ever heard Leshy noises during the day. Maybe he's nocturnal, Eli suggested. Maybe, I agreed. At any rate, we have flashlights, and it looks like the sun will be going down soon. The sky was fading to a pale pinky orange. The chill in the air grew colder. I shoved my hands into my pockets. Hey, we should start heading back soon, James said. Not yet, I said. Don't you want to do some night hiking? James and Kate shared a questioning look. I guess I'm up for anything, James said hesitantly. Kate shot him a look that said that was the wrong answer. Hey, why don't we find a place to sit down for a bit? I suggested, trying to appease my friends. This seemed to lighten Kate's mood, who brightened up considerably. We found a few rocks to sit on nearby, bordering a shimmering stream. James broke out some granola bars he'd brought, and we snacked on those while the sun sank beneath the tree line, leaving us in a wash of pale, dusky blue light. That's when the noises started. It was the same unearthly, beastly braying from before, a guttural bleating that sounded like nothing from this world. What the hell was that? Kate asked, shooting up out of her seat. I pulled my phone from my pocket, turning on the camera as quickly as possible. Sounded close, whatever the hell it was, James said, and there was singing. Further off in the woods, almost inaudible, came the voice of a girl and what sounded like some haunting melody. I couldn't make out any words. Eli looked as pale as a ghost himself. That's the girl, he said, eyes locked and blinking towards the ethereal tune. Come on, I said, pulling Eli's arm. This seemed to snap the boy out of his trance, who in turn ran to catch up with me. Wait, James called. Where are you going? Kate shouted. I didn't stop. I needed proof of the Leshy. I ran towards the noises, the forest around me growing dimmer as the sun finally set. I stumbled over roots, struggling to keep my footing, all the while the brays and grunts grew louder still. Alex, I heard Eli shout. He sounded far away. I turned, looking for my friend, realizing he wasn't behind me like I had thought. Eli. I screamed over the sounds of the Leshy and the singing. Alex. Shit, I swore under my breath. Eli, in my haste I'd lost my bearings. I couldn't even tell if that was actually Eli or something much more sinister. All the while I stood there thinking, the bleating got closer. Now it seemed like the noises were coming from only a few feet away. A cold sweat trickled down my back. I only had seconds. I turned and ran. I was too slow. The beast sprinted through the woods. In the darkness I couldn't see it. but I could hear it right on my heels, and then it pounced. Whatever the leshy was, it must have been heavy, because I went down hard. My shoulder hit the ground first, then my head snapped hard into the ground. Blazing white-hot pain erupted in my forehead, radiating across my vision. I struggled to remain conscious, to lift myself up and keep running. But even breathing was a chore. I couldn't keep awake, and as I felt myself slipping, the leshy grabbed hold of my ankle and started to drag me through the forest. When I finally woke, my head throbbed, my body felt like lead. I tried to open my eyes. I was unsuccessful. "Alex," someone said. It was a familiar voice. "Wake up." I tried again to open my eyes, peeling my eyelids open slowly. My vision was fuzzy. It was like there was a sheet of plastic over each of my eyes, blurring my vision. There was a fire. That was the first thing I noticed. A small campfire, nothing huge. Then I saw the figure. I blinked a few times, trying desperately to clear my vision. "Eli," I asked. My voice sounded far away, muffled, like I was underwater. "Good evening, Alex," Eli said. "Eli," I slurred. "I don't think I'm, doing too well." "That's okay, Alex. I think you'll find in a few minutes that you are doing just swell." I blinked again, the image of Eli clearing a little bit, except it wasn't Eli. Not entirely. The thing had Eli's face, sure, but its skin looked almost greenish. His hands could hardly be called hands. The flesh of his arms peeled away at the wrists, leaving bare skeleton exposed, except his bones looked inexplicably like twisted, gnarled tree roots. They were the color of a birch tree. Out of Eli's forehead sprouted the graceful ivory antlers. "What the hell?" I hit my head hard, I said, swallowing hard to try and make the words come out clearer. "Oh, I know you hit your head. I pounced on you. Did you expect a soft landing? I have to say you have been the funnest mortal I've played with in a long time. Ever since you moved here, you've been a tough cookie. Hell, even after you thought the leshy existed, you wanted to go out and find it. Most people would have shit their pants and left town. No, you're a special kind of mortal, gullible like the rest, but special. You were a leshy a long, thought you were ma frien," I muttered. My thoughts raced as fast as my heartbeat. "Oh, come now, Alex. I'm a trickster spirit. Do you really think I have friends?" Eli laughed a wicked laugh. His old, charming smile twisted into a wicked mockery, showing off Eli's now insanely sharp canine teeth. "What do you want from?" I asked, still laying helplessly against the tree trunk. "I just want to have a good time. You know, I might have left out some details when I told you the old stories about the leshy. I think I forgot to mention how we leshen love to torture those that we take into the woods, how your screams are like ambrosia to my kind, how we love the taste of flesh, the juices of human fat and muscle. You are going to make one fine meal," Eli said. I closed my eyes again, feeling the pull of my weary mind, just wanting this to be over. "Get the hell away from him," I heard someone scream. Snapping open my eyes, I saw Kate enter the leshy's small clearing, grabbing a burning stick from Eli's campfire. He let out a loud growl as Kate smacked at Eli with the flaming branch. Eli slashed back with his root claws, but Kate was fast. She beat him back one step, then another, and then she made contact, whacking Eli across the eyes with her weapon and causing ashes and bluish blood to fly. Eli clutched his head, his seared eyeballs sizzling with the heat. He shrieked and howled terribly, retreating from the clearing and blindly into the woods. Alex, she screamed, running to me. The last thing I saw before slipping back into sweet sleep was Kate standing over me, covered in the Leshy's blue-black blood. I woke up again in the hospital sometime that night. It was late. The window in my room was dark. Kate was with me, sleeping in a chair beside my bed. I sank back against my bed, snuggling my head against my pillows. I drifted back off to sleep, listening to my heartbeat monitor. Somewhere far away in the woods, a million miles from my hospital bed, I swear I could hear an unearthly braying shriek. It was a howl of pain.